Lost among giants, Kiva stumbled, her shackled feet scraping against the smooth, cold floor of the palace. The guards were relentless, their cold eyes never straying from her as they shoved her along. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the entire alien empire bore down on her. The palace was an imposing structure, stretching upward in stark, angular patterns that seemed to claw at the very heavens. It was a monument to the power of the Zervok, their unyielding rule made manifest in every stone and beam. As she was dragged deeper into the palace's heart, Keva's mind raced. She had always been an optimist, driven by the belief that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. But now, surrounded by creatures so vast and alien, that hope felt fragile, like a flickering candle in the face of an overwhelming storm. The brutal reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. She had been part of the first interstellar mission to reach out beyond Earth's boundaries, to make contact with alien life. But the Zervok didn't see her as a representative of a new frontier. They saw her as an inferior species, ripe for exploitation. She had been captured along with the rest of the crew, sold into servitude in the mining colonies of this alien world. The guards pushed open the massive doors to a high-tech interrogation chamber, its sterile walls flickering with a network of alien symbols she couldn't decipher. A table sat in the center, its surface shimmering with an energy Kiva could feel even from across the room. It was cold, calculating, the kind of place where hope went to die. "Strip her of her human belongings," the tyrant commanded, his voice booming across the chamber. The guards complied, removing the small utility belt she had worn, the only piece of human technology she had left, along with the token of humanity's resilience, a worn photo of her family back on Earth. Kiva fought back a surge of emotion. She couldn't let them take this from her, the last piece of home. Her family's faces were a reminder that the world she had left behind still mattered, that she still mattered. But as one of the guards approached, her heart sank. She needed to focus. Her survival depended on it. The guards turned to the tyrant, awaiting further orders. The tyrant's gaze was as cold as ice, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed her. He leaned forward on his throne, his forearms folding across his chest in a posture that exuded dominance. "You think yourself clever, human. You think you can defy me. There is no escape from the mines. Your species is weak, helpless." Kiva refused to be intimidated. She looked up, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with a defiance that surprised even herself. "You don't know what we're capable of." The tyrant's expression flickered for a split second, something akin to curiosity crossing his alien features. Then, without warning, he snapped his fingers, and two guards dragged her toward the table. "Prepare her for transportation to the mines," he ordered. But as Kiva was restrained to the cold, metallic surface, she felt something shift. A presence, like a hum beneath the surface of the floor, resonating in her very bones. She couldn't explain it. There was something different, something unusual about the air around her. And then it hit her. The tyrant had underestimated her. He had thought her a mere human, an insignificant creature whose only value was in her labor. But Kiva Jameson wasn't just another slave. She had been trained as an engineer, and engineers didn't just build. They solved problems. They adapted, they created, and they always found a way out. She would survive this. She had to. As the cold restraints locked around her wrists and ankles, Kiva's mind began to work in overdrive. She studied the table she was bound to. It was strange, but its surface seemed to pulse, as if responding to her thoughts. There were no obvious buttons or controls, but something about the way it hummed suggested it was an interface, not just a tool for confinement. Kiva's heart raced with renewed purpose. If she could figure out how it worked, perhaps she could turn it to her advantage. The guard stepped back, and for a brief moment, Kiva was alone in the chamber. The silence hung heavy, thick with the weight of her thoughts. Her training kicked in as she mentally mapped out her options. There was no escaping without a plan. She had to outsmart them. She began to focus, letting the room fade from her mind as she connected the dots. The technology of the Zervok was unlike anything she had ever seen on Earth. But it wasn't perfect. Every system had weaknesses, blind spots, gaps waiting to be exploited. The pulse of the table was subtle but rhythmic. Kiva realized it wasn't just a device to hold her. It was designed to control her life force, her energy. But she had studied enough alien tech to know that such devices often relied on energy fields, and energy fields, like any system, could be disrupted. Her breath slowed as she focused. She reached for the small utility belt she had worn earlier, now in the hands of one of the guards. The belt had contained a small piece of Earth technology, a simple energy disruptor. It wasn't much, but it could interfere with the device controlling her. As the guards returned to the room, Kiva's hand shot out, faster than they could react, grabbing the disruptor from their hands. It buzzed to life with a faint hum, and the restraints on her wrists sparked and fizzled before falling away entirely. The guards stood in shock, their alien faces registering disbelief. Kiva wasted no time. With a deft movement, she shoved the disruptor against the panel beside her, causing a massive surge of energy to ripple through the room. The chamber's walls flickered, and the hum of the table began to distort. "Run!" Kiva shouted at herself, the words almost lost in the chaos of the moment. She grabbed what remained of her belongings, her fingers trembling with adrenaline as she sprinted toward the palace doors. She didn't have time to think. She only had time to act. As the doors slammed open, Kiva bolted into the unknown, the echo of her own heartbeat ringing in her ears. She had no plan, no backup, but she had one thing the Zervok didn't: hope. And with that, she had a chance. Shadows of the mind. Kiva's pulse thundered in her ears as she raced through the palace halls, her every step echoing in the marble corridors like a heartbeat in the vast emptiness. The surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins, but it was tempered by the cold realization that escape was only the first part of the plan. Her heart was heavy with the weight of her next decision. What to do now? The palace was vast, a labyrinth of glittering architecture, alien designs, and guarded passageways. Every turn was filled with danger, every corner a potential death trap. She had to think, and think fast. The guards would be after her within moments. She had no illusions about that. But what they didn't know was the extent of her training. Kiva had spent years learning to outsmart and outmaneuver obstacles, to read situations, and to turn the tables when everything seemed lost. This was just another challenge. She ducked into a narrow passage, its walls lined with shimmering blue panels. A flicker of movement caught her eye. One of the guards, his towering figure barely visible in the distance. Kiva held her breath, pressing her back against the cold wall as she watched him pass by, unaware of her presence. The moment he was gone, she exhaled slowly, her mind still racing. Where would they take her if they caught her? Back to the mines. Worse, back to the interrogation chamber. The thought made her stomach churn. But she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She had a mission. She had to find out more about the Zervok, about their technology, about their weakness. And there was one place where she might find the answers: the vaults. Kiva had heard whispers of the vaults during her time in the palace, a secretive and heavily guarded section of the building, where the Zervok stored their most valuable artifacts. Some said it was where they kept their most advanced technologies, perhaps even the key to their power. If she could infiltrate the vaults, there was a chance she could find something: a weapon, a map, a clue that would help her escape this nightmare. She took a deep breath and steeled herself for the challenge ahead. She had no idea where the vaults were, but she had something the Zervok didn't: curiosity. She wasn't bound by the limits of their thinking. Kiva moved quickly, her footsteps light and deliberate as she navigated the winding halls. The palace's architecture was a puzzle, its alien designs making it difficult for her to orient herself. The walls were smooth and reflective, casting odd, distorted shadows that seemed to follow her every move. The passageways twisted and branched off into new, unfamiliar spaces, But Kiva wasn't unfamiliar with the feeling of being lost. She had grown up in the underbelly of a city on Earth, a place where the streets were narrow and full of secrets. She had learned to trust her instincts, to follow her gut when there was no map to guide her. Her eyes caught a flicker of motion again. A small group of guards, huddled together, speaking in low, harsh tones. They hadn't spotted her yet. Kiva slipped back into the shadows, her breath held tight in her chest. She could feel her heart beating faster now, but she pushed the panic away. The guards passed, their conversations filled with anger and frustration over her escape. Kiva didn't have time to eavesdrop. She was already moving again, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. She needed to get to the vaults, and she needed to do it before the palace was locked down entirely. After what felt like an eternity of careful navigation, Kiva found herself standing before a large set of ornate doors, their surface glowing with an eerie pale light. These doors were unlike any others in the palace, more intricate, more refined, and more guarded. She felt a wave of doubt for the first time since her escape. What if she wasn't ready for this? What if this was where her journey ended? But Kiva had never been one to turn back. She had faced obstacles before. Back on Earth, she had fought to overcome every hurdle that life had thrown at her. The same resolve that had kept her going during the darkest moments of her life burned within her now. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open just enough to slip through. Inside was a vast room filled with strange alien relics, artifacts, technology, and what appeared to be a series of ancient Zervok symbols etched into the walls. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust, a sharp contrast to the sterile environment outside. But it wasn't the artifacts that caught her attention, it was the center of the room. There, suspended in a column of glowing energy, was a massive orb. It shimmered with a strange, almost hypnotic light, and Kiva felt a pull toward it, an inexplicable force that seemed to reach out and grasp her heart. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about that orb, something familiar. Her mind whirled as she approached, her hand reaching out toward it without thought. But just as her fingers brushed the surface, a voice broke through the silence. "Not so fast, human." Kiva spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the disruptor in her pocket, but it was too late. The guards were already there, their massive forms filling the doorway. "You should have known better than to come here," the leader of the group sneered, his face twisting into a cruel smile. "You've wandered into the heart of the Empire, and now you will pay the price." The room seemed to close in around Kiva. Her options were limited, her chances of escape growing slimmer by the second. But as the guards advanced, she felt that same familiar rush of determination. They couldn't take this from her. Not now. Not when she was so close. With one last glance at the orb, she turned and bolted for the door. She had no plan, no clear way out, but she had the will to survive, and that was something the Zervok had underestimated. The guards gave chase, but Kiva was faster. She ducked and weaved through the corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the end. She couldn't let it be. She was getting closer, closer to the answers she needed. But as she rounded another corner, her foot caught on a loose piece of debris, sending her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her side, and she gritted her teeth against the sting. There was no time to waste. The guards were nearly on top of her. In a desperate move, Kiva reached for the disruptor and fired. The blast rang out, sending a wave of energy through the corridor. The guards recoiled, momentarily stunned. She didn't wait to see the aftermath. She just ran. She could feel the weight of their pursuit, the sound of their footsteps growing closer, but there was no turning back now. The vaults, the orb, the secrets, it was all within her grasp. And nothing, not even the Zervok, could take that from her. The veil of secrets. Kiva's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as she sprinted down the labyrinthine corridors, the pulse of her footsteps blending with the rhythm of her pounding heart. The disruptor in her hand felt heavy, though it was barely an afterthought now. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't about having the best weapon. It was about knowing when to fight, when to run, and when to trust the unspoken instincts that guided her in the darkest of moments. But even her instincts were beginning to falter. The guards' voices echoed from behind her, growing louder, more insistent. They were closing in fast. The palace, with its towering, imposing structure, seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of sharp angles and eerie, alien architecture. Every turn, every corridor felt like a trap that had been set with her in mind. But Kiva refused to be trapped. Not again. She had to find a way out. A new path, a new direction. But every door, every passage led her further into the heart of the palace, the very heart she had been trying to avoid. There was only one place left she hadn't explored: the underlevels. The underlevels of the palace were whispered about in hushed tones by the servants and soldiers who worked in the upper echelons of the building. Few had seen them, even fewer had dared to speak of them. But Keva had overheard enough to know that it was a place shrouded in secrecy, hidden away from prying eyes. It was where the most dangerous secrets were kept. And she needed those secrets. She turned sharply down another narrow hall, her mind racing with the calculations of her next move. The walls narrowed as she approached an unmarked door, its surface smooth and glossy, with no handle or visible entry point. Yet, she could feel something beneath her skin, the faintest hum, as if the door itself was alive, pulsating with energy. With a glance over her shoulder, Kiva reached out, her hand trembling ever so slightly. As her fingers brushed against the door's surface, a soft vibration traveled up her arm, followed by a distinct click. The door slid open silently, revealing a darkened stairwell, descending into a void of uncertainty. Kiva hesitated for just a moment. There was no turning back now. The guards were right behind her. She could hear their voices now, shouting orders, the sound of their boots crashing against the polished floor. Steeling herself, Kiva plunged into the stairwell, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss. The air was thick with the scent of old metal, damp stone, and dust. The light from her disruptor cast long shadows down the narrow steps as she descended, her mind fully focused on the task ahead. The underlevels were a labyrinth in their own right, but Kiva had always been good at navigating places like this. It wasn't the physical space that concerned her. It was the uncertainty of what lay in wait. The descent seemed to stretch on forever, and just as the darkness around her thickened, a faint light emerged from below. The soft hum of machinery vibrated through the walls, signaling that she was nearing something significant. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, Kiva found herself standing in front of a massive, fortified door. The faint hum emanated from within, and the faint outline of alien symbols shimmered across its surface, symbols she hadn't seen before. These weren't just decoration. This was a language, a code, a system of information that the Zervok had guarded for millennia. Her fingers brushed against the symbols, and to her surprise, the door opened with a soft, reluctant creak, as though it had been waiting for her. Beyond the door, the room stretched into darkness, only a faint light from above illuminating the strange alien machines scattered throughout. The air inside was thick with the scent of ozone, as if electricity and something far older than technology had permeated the walls. Kiva stepped forward cautiously, her every move measured. She knew she wasn't alone in here. And that was when she saw it. A massive crystalline structure sat in the center of the room, its surface pulsing with an ethereal light. The crystal was enormous, bigger than any object she'd ever seen before, and yet it seemed almost delicate, as if it could shatter at the slightest touch. The energy emanating from it was unmistakable. This was not merely a piece of technology. It was something far more potent, something that could change everything. Without thinking, Kiva moved closer, drawn by the force of the crystal. She could feel it vibrating in her chest, resonating with something deep within her. It was as if the crystal was speaking to her, its energy reaching into her very soul, pulling at memories she didn't fully understand. This was the Zervok's power source. This was the thing they had used to conquer galaxies, to extend their reach far beyond their homeworld. But Kiva wasn't here to admire it. She was here to destroy it, to break it open and free the secrets it held. She took a deep breath and began to analyze the structure. The crystal seemed to be surrounded by a network of cables and wires that connected to a series of consoles along the walls. But what caught her attention were the strange glyphs embedded into the consoles, glyphs she recognized from the palace's upper levels. These were the same symbols she had seen etched into the walls of the vaults. Her mind worked quickly, piecing together the puzzle. She had studied languages before, had learned to crack codes, decipher ancient texts. This wasn't just a lock. It was an encrypted system, a system that, if breached, could reveal the very secrets the Zervok had hidden from the universe for centuries. Keva's hands moved over the consoles, manipulating the wires and buttons with practiced precision. Her fingers danced between the glyphs, unlocking one after another, until finally, the crystal's energy flickered. A series of harsh beeps filled the room as the systems went into lockdown mode. Panic surged through her chest, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't stop now. With a final push, the last glyph fell into place. The crystal erupted with a surge of energy, blinding light flooding the room. The walls trembled as if the very foundation of the palace was shifting. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the light faded. The hum of the machinery stopped. The crystal was still there, but it was no longer pulsing. It was as if Keva had unlocked something profound, something far greater than what she had intended. But what had she unleashed? Before she could process the magnitude of her actions, a voice echoed through the room. "Well done, Keva. You've found the key." She spun around, heart racing. Standing at the far side of the room was an unfamiliar figure, cloaked in shadows, a figure she never expected to see again. The revelation. Keva's heart skipped a beat as her eyes locked onto the figure standing at the far side of the room. The shadows clung to the stranger like a second skin, obscuring their face, but the presence was unmistakable. The voice, a calm, almost amused tone, sent a chill down her spine. "Well done, Keva. You've found the key." For a moment, the world seemed to stop, her thoughts grinding to a halt as she tried to make sense of the situation. This was no accident. The stranger knew her name. They had been waiting for her. "You?" Keva's voice trembled as she forced herself to speak. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward into the dim light, their features becoming clearer. They were tall, with an air of quiet authority that radiated from every movement. But what struck Keva the most was the insignia on their uniform, an emblem she recognized all too well. It was the mark of the Sovereign Council, the highest body in the Zervok hierarchy. They had always been faceless, a distant entity that controlled everything from the shadows. But this individual wasn't just any council member. This was someone much more dangerous. This was a decision-maker, a puppet master. "Who I am isn't important," the stranger replied smoothly, his voice betraying a cold detachment. "What matters is what you've just done, Keva. You've unlocked something far more valuable than you realize." Keva clenched her fists, her mind racing as she tried to process the gravity of her actions. The crystal had been the key. She had unlocked its secrets, but now, it seemed, the consequences were far beyond what she had anticipated. "What do you mean?" Keva demanded, her voice steadier now. She wasn't going to let this person intimidate her, not after everything she had already endured. The stranger smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips that only heightened her unease. "You've opened the way to a network of information. The truth that the Zervok have kept hidden for centuries. Secrets about the origins of our power, our reach, even our weaknesses. It's all here, inside this system." Keva's breath caught in her throat as she absorbed his words. She had always known there was something more to the Zervok than what was publicly known, their ruthless expansion, their iron grip on countless star systems. But she had never imagined there could be such a vast web of secrets buried deep within the heart of the Empire. "The Zervok don't just rule through force," the stranger continued, his voice lowering with intensity. They rule through manipulation, deception, and control. But this crystal, this system you've unlocked, isn't just a weapon. It's a key to something much older, something more powerful. Keva's mind whirled. Something older. What are you talking about? For the first time, the stranger's eyes seemed to flicker with emotion. Something fleeting, almost sorrowful. The crystal isn't from the Zervok. It's an ancient artifact, created by a civilization long lost to history. A civilization that once ruled this galaxy, until they were destroyed. But their legacy, their technology survived. And now, you've opened the door to it. Keva took a step forward, her confusion growing. Why would you want me to unlock it? You work for the Sovereign Council, don't you? What's your game? The figure gave a short, dark laugh. You think I'd work for the Sovereign Council? No, Keva. I've been playing them, just as they've been playing you. I've been watching you, waiting for the right moment. The words hit Keva like a slap, but she didn't flinch. So, you've been manipulating me from the start. You knew I would come here to this place. Not exactly, the stranger replied, his tone thoughtful. I knew you would eventually find your way to this room. The crystal has a way of calling to those who are desperate enough to seek it. You were the right person at the right time, and I've had my own reasons for wanting you to succeed. Keva's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. She had always known there was something off about the way her mission had unfolded, something she hadn't understood until now. But there was one question that loomed larger than the rest. If you're not with the Sovereign Council, then who are you working for? The stranger stepped closer, his face now fully illuminated. There was something chilling about the way his eyes gleamed with purpose, like a predator with a carefully laid plan. I'm not working for anyone, Keva. I'm working for myself. For the future. For the galaxy's freedom. Keva stared at him, her confusion growing. What are you talking about? You're saying you're some kind of freedom fighter, and yet you've been toying with me this whole time. The stranger's expression softened, almost regretful. I never wanted to toy with you, Keva. I needed you to unlock the crystal because only someone with your unique skills could do it. You've always been more than just a pawn in this game. You've been a key player in something much larger. Keva felt a pang of doubt twist in her gut. Was she really just a pawn, after all? Had everything she had done, every choice she had made, been part of a plan she hadn't even known existed? The stranger seemed to sense her hesitation. Listen carefully. The truth you unlocked isn't just about the Zervok. It's about what happens next. The crystal will allow us to reset the balance of power, to expose the truth about the Zervok's manipulation, and finally break free from their chains. Keva shook her head. But what does that mean? You want to destroy the Empire. Wipe them out entirely. Not entirely, the stranger said, his voice lowering to a near whisper. We need to expose them, Keva. Let the galaxy see them for what they truly are. Then, and only then, can we truly fight back. Keva felt the weight of his words sink in. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about escaping the Empire's control. It was about changing the entire fabric of their reality, tearing down the old structures, and replacing them with something new. Something freer, something more honest. She looked at the crystal again, her thoughts racing. She had always dreamed of a galaxy where the oppressed were free, where the innocent weren't crushed beneath the weight of tyranny. But could this stranger, this mysterious figure, really be the answer? Before she could ask any more questions, the room shook with a sudden violent tremor. The crystal flared with energy, and the walls around them hummed with an ominous resonance. It's happening, the stranger whispered urgently. The system is waking up. We don't have much time. If we're going to expose the Zervok's secrets, we need to act now. Keva's pulse quickened, her mind spinning as she weighed the stakes. The choice was hers, and the consequences would be felt across the galaxy. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking with the stranger's. I'm in, she said, her voice steady with resolve. The betrayal. Kiva's decision echoed through the quiet room as she steeled herself for what was to come. She had crossed the line. There was no turning back now. The crystal glowed with an ethereal blue light, its energy pulsating with power that made her heart race. It felt as though the very air around her was charged with the promise of something monumental, something world-changing. The stranger, who now introduced himself as Orion, nodded in approval, though his expression remained unreadable, like a man who had already seen the end of this story before it even began. "Good," Orion said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. "You've chosen wisely. The crystal is the key to everything. But unlocking its secrets is only the beginning. What comes next will be far more dangerous than you can imagine." Kiva swallowed hard. She had no illusions about the dangers she was stepping into, but there was a fire inside her, a spark of something that couldn't be extinguished. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore. She was doing it for everyone who had ever suffered under the Zervok's oppressive rule. "So what now?" she asked, the words coming out sharper than she intended. Orion's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now we expose the truth. But the Zervok are not fools. They've anticipated this moment for centuries, and they have their own plans in motion. We've been playing a dangerous game, Kiva. One false move, and it's all over." Kiva's stomach churned as she realized the weight of what she had just agreed to. It wasn't just about unlocking the crystal anymore. It was about taking down an empire that had reigned unchallenged for centuries. It was about dismantling a system so ingrained in every part of the galaxy that it would take nothing short of a miracle to bring it down. "You said you've been watching me," Kiva said slowly, her gaze never leaving Orion's. "But how do I know I can trust you? How do I know you're not just using me to get what you want?" Orion's gaze flickered for the briefest of moments, his facade slipping, but he quickly regained control. "You've had your fair share of manipulation, Kiva. I don't expect you to trust me blindly. But I've seen what the Zervok are capable of. I've lived through their cruelty. This isn't just about power for me. This is about ending their reign once and for all. You don't have to trust me completely, but you can trust the mission." Kiva's eyes narrowed. She knew that trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. She had learned that lesson the hard way. But the stakes were too high for hesitation. "All right," she said, her voice steady, though a storm of doubt raged within her. "Let's take them down." But just as the words left her mouth, the air around them shifted. There was a sharp, sudden noise, like a crackling of static, and the crystal pulsed with a violent burst of light. Kiva stumbled back, her vision momentarily blurring as the ground beneath her seemed to tremble. "What's happening?" she demanded, her heart pounding in her chest. Orion's eyes widened in realization. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. The system wasn't supposed to activate yet. Kiva turned to look at him, her fear mounting. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "The Zervok," Orion whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "They've been tracking us. They know we're here." Before Kiva could respond, the walls of the room seemed to close in, the air growing thick and heavy as a low mechanical hum filled the space. The crystal flared brighter, and then the entire room was bathed in an intense, searing light. She raised her hand to shield her eyes, but it was too late. The light engulfed her, and the world around her disintegrated into a blur of white. When her vision cleared, Kiva found herself in a completely different place. She was no longer in the cold, metallic room she had been standing in. Now she was surrounded by the harsh, unforgiving landscape of an alien world. The sky above was a deep shade of red, and the ground beneath her was cracked and barren. Towering structures, made of some kind of dark stone, loomed in the distance like silent sentinels, watching over the desolation. "Where are we?" Kiva gasped, her mind reeling from the sudden shift. "This is their stronghold," Orion said quietly, his face grim. "The heart of the Zervok's power. We're inside their most secure facility. And we've been caught." Kiva felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. They were trapped. She had never imagined it would come to this. They had been running on borrowed time, but she hadn't realized just how fragile that time had been. "I thought you said we were ready," Keva said, her voice shaking. "How did they find us?" Orion didn't answer right away. His eyes darted around the barren landscape, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect this level of interference. They'd been monitoring the crystal's activation. The moment you unlocked it, they knew we were here." Keva's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. They had thought they were one step ahead, but now they were trapped in the very heart of the enemy's territory. The odds were against them. "Then we need to get out of here," Keva said, a sense of determination rising within her. "We can't just leave," Orion replied, his tone colder now. "You've unlocked the system, Keva. The Zervok are going to want to make sure you don't walk away from this with your life. The moment we move, they'll have us cornered." Keva's blood ran cold at his words. She had always known this mission would be dangerous. But this was beyond anything she had prepared for. The truth had been revealed, but at what cost? And then it happened. A figure appeared on the horizon, moving steadily towards them. Keva's pulse quickened as she strained to see who it was. The figure was tall, armored, and unmistakably Zervok. They had found them. Orion stiffened beside her. "We need to move. Now." Keva didn't hesitate. She bolted in the opposite direction, adrenaline flooding her system. Behind her, Orion followed closely, his footsteps heavy but deliberate. They had to escape. The odds were stacked against them, but they couldn't afford to fail. As they ran, Keva's mind raced. She had unlocked the truth, but now it was clear that the Zervok would stop at nothing to ensure that truth stayed buried. And worse, she was beginning to realize that there was more to Orion's story than he had let on. There was something in his eyes, a darkness she couldn't quite place. Had he been playing her all along? But there was no time to question him now. They had to survive first. Answers could wait. The reckoning. The cold wind whipped through the barren landscape, the red sky casting a surreal glow over the jagged terrain. Keva's lungs burned with every breath as she pushed herself harder, running faster than she ever had before. Beside her, Orion's movements were steady, calculated, but Keva could see the strain in his eyes. They were being hunted, and every second they remained in the open brought them closer to their inevitable capture. They had crossed what felt like miles of desolate land, and yet, despite the overwhelming urgency to escape, Keva couldn't shake the sense of something deeper at play. Orion had been vague in his explanations, and now the uncertainty gnawed at her. The crystal had been activated, yes, but what did it truly unlock? What had they unleashed upon the universe? "Orion," she gasped, stumbling slightly over a rock. "We need to talk. Now." Orion didn't slow his pace. His jaw clenched, and his eyes flickered to the horizon, where more Zervok patrols were gathering. Their ominous, armored forms outlined against the fiery sky. The sight of them made Keva's heart race, but she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that Orion knew more than he had told her. "We don't have time for talk," Orion snapped, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to find cover. Then we'll discuss this." Keva's resolve hardened. She wasn't about to be distracted. "Not now. I'm not running blindly anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to rise in her chest. "I need to know what's going on. Why did you bring me here? What's the true purpose of the crystal?" Orion stopped in his tracks, his broad frame turning to face her. For the first time since they had met, he looked vulnerable, caught between something he wasn't ready to reveal and the weight of what he had already said. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, softened with a hint of regret. "You're right," he said quietly. "You deserve to know the truth." Keva stepped closer, her pulse racing as the truth finally seemed within her grasp. "Then tell me." He hesitated, his eyes scanning the horizon before his voice dropped to a near whisper. "The crystal is not just a key. It's a weapon, Keva. A weapon the Zervok have been seeking for millennia. They've been trying to harness its power to dominate the galaxy, to enslave entire species. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the crystal is more than they bargained for. Keva's brow furrowed, confusion clouding her thoughts. What do you mean? How is it more? Orion took a deep breath, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. The crystal has the power to control minds, entire populations, if necessary. But it can also erase memories, manipulate time, and change the very fabric of reality. When it was activated, it connected to something far older than the Zervok, something beyond their understanding. Keva felt a chill run through her. The realization hit her like a wave, crashing over her senses. Are you saying that the crystal is sentient? Orion nodded, his expression grave. It's not just a tool, it's a being. And it has its own agenda. The Zervok weren't ready for what it could do. They thought they were in control, but they were only pawns. The ground beneath them trembled again, the hum of energy intensifying. Keva looked around, alarm rising in her chest. So what happens now? If the Zervok can't control the crystal, then who can? Orion's lips curled into a bitter smile. No one. Not even I know the full extent of its power. But the Zervok are smart. They won't give up easily, and neither will we. Before Keva could respond, a sharp crack echoed in the distance, the unmistakable sound of blaster fire. They've found us, Orion said, his voice tinged with urgency. We need to move. Now. Without waiting for her to reply, he turned and began to sprint, his powerful strides cutting through the desolate landscape. Keva followed close behind, her mind reeling from the weight of Orion's revelation. The crystal wasn't just a key to destroying the Zervok. It was something far more dangerous, something that could reshape reality itself. And yet there was still so much they didn't know. As they ran, the ground began to shift. The red sky above seemed to warp and distort, the very fabric of the world bending around them, as though the crystal's power was resonating through the environment itself. The terrain beneath their feet changed, morphing from jagged rocks to smooth, polished stone. The landscape felt alive, shifting with every step they took, as if responding to the crystal's activation. Keva stumbled, her feet slipping as the ground became increasingly unstable. What's happening? She gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. Orion didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a mix of awe and fear. The crystal's power is destabilizing the area. It's like it's tearing apart the fabric of this reality. We need to get to shelter, now. If we stay here too long, we'll be caught in the collapse. Keva felt the weight of his words. The world around them was unraveling, and they had no idea how much time they had before everything collapsed into chaos. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Ahead of them, a massive structure loomed, a towering fortress made of black stone, its spires reaching into the sky like fingers stretching toward the heavens. It was their only hope of survival. They had to reach it before it was too late. We're almost there, Orion called over his shoulder, his voice tense. Keep moving. But just as they reached the entrance of the fortress, a loud roar erupted from behind them. A massive creature, part organic, part machine, emerged from the shifting ground. Its body was a grotesque amalgamation of Zervok technology and alien flesh, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It was a weapon, a living embodiment of the Zervok's desperation. Keva's breath caught in her throat as the creature lunged toward them, its massive claws tearing through the air with frightening speed. She dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. Orion reacted faster, drawing a blaster from his side and firing at the creature, but the blasts seemed to have little effect on its armored hide. We need to get inside, Keva yelled, scrambling to her feet. Now. Orion nodded, his face hardening with resolve. Follow me. They sprinted toward the fortress, their hearts pounding in their chests as the creature pursued them, relentless and unyielding. Just as it was about to strike, the massive doors of the fortress creaked open, revealing a dark, empty interior. "Go," Orion shouted. Kiva didn't hesitate. She rushed through the doors. Orion closed behind her. The moment they were inside, the doors slammed shut, sealing them in darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Kiva's breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself, her mind still reeling from the chaos outside. She looked at Orion, who was already scanning the dimly lit room. "We're safe," he said, though his voice was tight with tension. For now. But Kiva knew that this wasn't over. The Zervok weren't just after the crystal. They were after everything it represented. And she had just made a decision that would change the course of history forever. As the distant hum of the creature's frustration echoed through the fortress, Kiva realized that the real battle was only just beginning.